Jason, Linda, thank you for joining us here today to talk about the impacts of COVID-19 on the supply chain and where we're going to be headed once we get past this whole COVID-19 pandemic.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, I think we're living in obviously unprecedented times, and to say that COVID has had an impact on the supply chain would be a major understatement. And Jason, I know you guys are seeing this from a consulting perspective on a day in, day out basis.
Absolutely. What we're seeing is a big change in order profiles. Not as much retail, not as much wholesale, more direct to consumer, e-commerce, and that's really playing out. Notwithstanding, social distancing within a distribution center and the effects that have in really distancing people in work centers. But as far as like the order profiles and what's flowing through a facility, certainly more e-commerce.
So, and that makes a lot of sense when you think about what consumers are doing right now, and for the last few months being hunkered down at home and not being comfortable, stores and restaurants not being open. Linda, is that a lot of what you're seeing as well?
It is, and to Jason's point, that order profile shift has really affected the way that you process line items in the warehouse. So like a retail order will typically have a lot of line items, and you can process that really kind of efficiently with a lot of types of automation or even manual picking. Whereas an e-commerce order is going to have a lower line item count, and it requires a lot more labor to move the same amount of product out the door. So even as an omni-channel fulfillment center, for instance, is seeing their retail volume drop, if their e-commerce volume is increasing, that can create an unpredictable effect on their labor and how they use their automation.
Mm-hmm. And what are companies doing? What have you been seeing to counteract some of this change in order volume and the different types of orders that are being processed? What are you seeing from an operational standpoint?
Well, from an operational standpoint, in order to process the orders, first I'll back up a little bit. Before I talk about how they're processing the different types of orders, I'll say that they're affected in terms of even how they can staff the warehouses. So warehouses that had excess capacity are now expanding their operating hours, where they're splitting their shift in half to separate their workforce. And so really they're using their automation as much as 24/7 as possible so that they can spread out that volume across different parts of the day to keep their workforce separated. And then in order to fulfill the different kinds of volume, the e-commerce versus the retail, they're actually having to sometimes do more one-off types of fulfillment to get the smaller orders processed in a facility that was typically handling, bigger full totes of product.
Okay. And Jason, I've heard the term a couple times used by some of our customers and others in the industry that, man, it feels like every day right now is a Black Friday.
Yep.
Is that what you're hearing and seeing?
For customers who have a lot of demand, they're seeing like peak to average ratios of 10, 12, 15 to 1. I say peak to average ratios. That really means on an average day, order volume flowing through a site. But peak is really these Black Fridays, the consumer-driven peaks. And there's just a lot of manning and staffing, especially as we're doing e-com orders, lots of labor, and just getting labor and trying to get, labor is a shortage. That's what's leading to automation, leading to goods-to-person solutions that would mitigate those issues.
Are those that you're talking with, do they think that these trends that we're seeing are going to stay around post-COVID-19, or do they see this as a blip in the radar?
Well, a lot of it is pulling demand forward, right? So it's really hard to say. I mean, it's really hard to say. Nobody has a crystal ball. I believe that a lot of this is here to stick. I mean, just because it's so convenient to order and have curbside pickup, to order and have stuff delivered to your house, within a day. That's ultra convenient. But at the same time, as stores roll open and being able to see the selection and touching and feeling object, people will go to stores, and there will be retail fulfillment, order fulfillment, but I think e-commerce is going to continue to grow, almost exponentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have families and friends. I think we probably all have these same stories that you hear where, they were so resistant to ordering online, never done it before, or doing curbside pickup. And now they're like, man, what have I been missing out on? And so maybe Linda, talk a little bit about some of the trends and maybe your personal experiences that, maybe some of these buying trends are going to be around post-COVID-19 and what that effect might be on the supply chain.
Right, buy online, pick up in store has exploded, obviously. And so one of the effects of that, I think, is that stores are now fulfilling a lot of online orders from their in-the-store inventory. And so what that does is it changes the labor profile even inside the store. So we've talked about what's happening in the warehouse. Now you've got operators or workers inside the store who are fulfilling a job function that's very much like a warehouse operator. And so they need to develop processes, they need technology to support that. Retailers have traditionally had inventory that is in the store, and then they'll have online orders, online only SKUs, right? And so as you get more of this buy online, pick up in store, they're going to have to figure out a solution for getting more of that online only product available for in-store pickups because people don't want to really split up their orders.
Well, and that kind of leads to micro-fulfillment. Micro-fulfillment is like what I'm seeing is the next step for just what you're saying, Linda, is that, when people are fulfilling orders in a supermarket, for instance, they're traversing all the aisles and they're not too efficient at all. And you can handle that at, 5% of orders coming through, but as it leads to 20 to 30% of the orders going through, there really starts to be a labor trade-off, and to be more efficient, doing micro-fulfillment at the store, in the back room, holding more stock and being more efficient in that order fulfillment and really baking it into your process.
That's right. And for instance, in grocery fulfillment, once you have more than, say, 6% of your orders being fulfilled in the store, like in a buy online, pick up on the curbside process, the pickers, the store order pickers will start to congest the aisles.
Yep.
Online ordering of groceries has exploded, obviously. If you've tried to get an appointment to pick up your groceries and it's a week out, you can just see that they're completely maxed out. So as people start to come back into the stores, but then that sort of curbside pickup profile stays elevated, you're going to have shoppers who are running into pickers in the store if we continue to say that they're just going to follow the traditional route of picking off their own shelves.
So even before COVID-19, the term micro-fulfillment was probably one of the most searched material handling automation terms or supply chain terms around. And if I even go back to the Modex show that was just a few months ago, micro-fulfillment was really being talked about and displayed by almost every vendor there, every company there. And if anything, I think what it's really done is it's amplified the time or sped up the time that companies were thinking that they might be exploring micro-fulfillment or implementing a micro-fulfillment strategy, or something that maybe, I'd read that, 80% of retailers were either exploring micro-fulfillment post or prior to COVID-19, but, and we would think that it only will increase now as a result of what's happened.
Absolutely, yeah. It's hot. We have a lot of activity in that, with clients looking at micro-fulfillment and just trying to build out solutions that make sense for their new order profiles and, what SKUs and item what products they're carrying on their shelves, and how do we develop cost-effective solutions for them. And it's really getting, it's that last mile. Really, it's being efficient at that last mile and allowing more efficient distribution to the end nodes of the network, so that people, it's a convenience thing for people, and it's really, micro-fulfillment will enable that for consumers.
So I think one of the things that a lot of companies are struggling with right now, and even before the whole COVID episode, is how much are people willing to pay for convenience? And that's what I think is factoring a lot into this whole micro-fulfillment discussion, is when you pull the trigger on micro-fulfillment, is at what point is the cost of convenience outweigh the benefits that it offers?
Yeah, it's funny. We've all been conditioned by Amazon to expect free 2-day or next day delivery. And so that has translated to a really similar expectation on the curbside pickup or micro fulfillment side. People don't want to pay that curbside pickup fee. And so it costs companies a lot of money to fulfill these orders. And then if they make an error, or if they have to make a substitution that you don't like, they're eating that cost as well on the inventory side. So if you've got accuracy issues, it's really similar to where the warehouse industry was several years ago, right? Where they were working through order turn time, accuracy, all the stuff that we were working on, solutions to to bring automation in to clean those things up. Well, now it's happening in the stores.
Mm-hmm. And it's just escalating through the entire, all these new pickers have to deal with all these new issues, where in the past, we develop automation systems for distribution centers that automate, that really do the airproofing and order accuracy and, the turnaround time. Now they're having to learn this all manually, and so it's quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge. But that's why we develop, do our data analysis, do the analytics to determine what's the right return on investment and what's the right solutions that would impact, the way that customers want to order and want to receive their goods.
Shifting gears just a little bit, what are you guys seeing in terms from a safety standpoint that companies are implementing in their DCs, and what trends do you see that are going to be implemented over the next few years as a result of this whole COVID situation?
Well, prior to getting mass vaccinations, and there's temperature checks, there's contact tracing, there's tools that are ensuring that there's 6-foot distance and social distancing within distribution centers and manufacturing and assembly as well. So it's really trying to decrease the density of folks and being real thoughtful in the way that the current state designs is really trying to get as much as quick and as small of a footprint as you can. Now we're having to redesign areas. So if to provide more distance with social distancing. So it really depends on how long this really lasts, is what we'll have to do in rethinking the way that our systems are laid out.
Yeah, and I think there are probably some inherent benefits of automation when it comes to safety within a warehouse.
There are. Well, I mean, with automation, you are not walking all through the warehouse. You're not crossing paths with other folks. Typically, you're working at a goods-to-person station that belongs to you. You're signed in. People know what part of the warehouse you're in and for what parts of the day. Mm-hmm. Those goods-to-person workstations are spaced, right? Typically 6 or more feet apart. Mm-hmm. And so the places that implemented automation in the last couple of years, particularly with goods to person, they have called and said, it's perfect for this. Their labor force, they know where they are, they're not wandering around, and they can come in and go to their job and work at that job, and then feel kind of secure in that space. And then, they are adding some things like maybe plexiglass barriers between workstations and things like that as well.
Mm-hmm. That's more cosmetic. It's not systemic.
Right.
The systemic changes kind of come from people, like you said, serpentining through aisles and batch pick carts, and really all this activity, all this travel, all that interaction, compared and contrast to being somewhat static, minimal walking, minimal movement in your own kind of zone at a goods-to-person workstation. So it's
right. We built them to be ergonomic, right, and to facilitate operator comfort and then obviously productivity. But this has been like a very nice unintended side effect as well.
So there's definitely a big effect from COVID that we're seeing on international suppliers, international companies, really U.S. companies that are doing business overseas. And Jason, maybe talk a little bit about some of our clients or companies that have approached us about their supply chain.
Yeah, well, there's certainly been less volume of goods shipped into the States. So lots of cancellations on container. I think I read the other day a couple million sea containers less this year already. So there's been a lot less activity, a lot less inbound activity coming in, and it's really hard to know with the time delays of stuff coming in from overseas, shipping and receiving it, there's a lot of nuances in consumer behavior where we're just, maybe they thought we wanted something and we don't want that anymore. So it's the wrong stuff is showing up at the wrong time. And so, I see that there's a big trend towards onshoring, bringing stuff back here where supply chains are more nimble, we have better control, better visibility, and we're getting the right stuff at the right time. So,
Well, what kind of effect do you think that's going to have on the price of goods?
well, if you design your systems well, it should be a wash. Or just think about all the transportation and all the inefficiency with really geographically dispersed supply chains. I think by tightening it up, I think the price should be a wash as long as we're planning everything out efficiency, adding in automation when it makes sense, and taking out non-value added work from any process.
Right, and offshoring and kind of that just-in-time strategy, those are forms of leveraging. And right now we're kind of paying the price for that as we are not as nimble as we'd like to be. And so I do see that there's a lot of companies that are looking for ways to blend in more locally sourced materials and labor, so that if something does happen to disrupt the supply chain across the other side of the world, that they still have some options more locally to fulfill their orders. And so that's probably going to be combined with the reshoring, right? We're going to see people who are looking to understand their supply chain, to trace it. A lot of companies don't know exactly where every component comes from, that they're using for manufacturing or order fulfillment. So I think we're going to see companies who are looking to really understand their supply chain a lot better, and then also shorten it.
Are there certain segments of the economy that you think are more ripe to bring stuff back to an onshore type environment?
Gosh, I really couldn't. I don't know if I could specify anything specific in terms of manufacturing, but I do know that food distribution is looking to become a lot more local, and I think that that's a very obvious target for it, as well as we've seen especially with grocery shortages and things like that. Also, a lot of fast-moving consumer goods, toilet paper, paper towels. As that supply chain has been disrupted, those are probably going to be targets to come back.
I know there was a major concern early in the pandemic about the amount of pharmaceutical goods that are manufactured outside of this country.
Yeah.
And have you heard companies talking about bringing a lot of that production back to the United States?
I don't have visibility in that per se. It's a thought, but understanding where stuff comes from, like Linda had mentioned, and have tracing and traceability, with blockchain and knowing specifically all the steps that items have taken throughout their whole life cycle of, raw materials turned into finished goods. In many cases, we're ingesting these pharmaceuticals, so it's nice to know where stuff came from and the quality levels and ensuring that everything's above board. So I see that. I don't necessarily know what is going to move over, but I just think better visibility and having just better confidence in those supply chains makes better sense.
Some of the stuff that I've heard here in the recent news and speculation centers around safety stock that companies are going to be required through government regulations. And pharmaceuticals could be one example. We all heard about the respirators and the different types of life-saving devices that are desperately needed to be kept in a safety stock type environment here in the U.S. And I wonder what impact that's going to have on the supply chain here in the U.S.
Well, I know that it is, in distribution centers that are already, full, it's exacerbating that situation. So you're adding more, more storage, more days on hand, more inventory. I mean, it's just a buffer, and it's, that leads us to better storage mechanisms, more efficient utilization of space that they have. There's a lot of literature out there that's saying that there's more warehouse space needs due to that fact, due to increasing your days on hand and increasing how much inventory you have to carry just for that safety stock.
As well as, sorry, as well as the fact that you can't anticipate when an emergency is going to happen. So you're going to have this stock on hand. It may expire, right? And so having great inventory control mechanisms, being able to replenish it and keep that on-hand stock, but also have it be fresh and available when and if you need it. I think I saw in the news where there was a big stockpile of N95 masks that was intended to be used for something like this, and they were all expired. And because it was probably in a completely manually managed warehouse, right, just in pallets somewhere, and nobody was really tracking it.
Yep.
When you look at warehousing in the U.S., North America in general, and you compare that to other areas of the world, such as Europe, where because of land constraints, they've really adopted high-density storage. Do you see those trends increasing in the U.S. and North America?
Absolutely. Shuttle systems, unit load ASRS, goods to person solutions, across the board, certainly. Automation's not the tool for every situation. Some manual pallet in, pallet out operations do fine and just push back or double deep racking with very manual. But when it starts to get into a lot of velocity and a lot of movement implied with labor, then there starts to be a business case for automation, mixed pallet, rainbow pallets, building out. So certainly.
I'm glad that you mentioned mixed pallet, rainbow pallet, because that's a big impact that I've seen over the last couple of years as well. DCs used to be able to bring a full pallet in and then send that same full pallet out. As demand has been more fractured, right, and SKU proliferation has occurred, which I think is going to happen even more, and then stores want to keep just a certain amount of inventory in the store for many more SKUs than they used to. The labor required to make those mixed pallets is completely different from what you do to fulfill full pallet requests. And so I'm seeing a huge spike in requests for mixed pallet building applications, and that's not a really ergonomic job. It's not ergonomic, it's not operator friendly. And so at the same time that we're facing all of these labor constraints, we're creating these labor intensive jobs, and that's really kind of creating a conflict. So in that situation, you've really got to come up with creative solutions and technology to facilitate the fulfillment. As well as, kind of going back to the e-commerce each and Interpack sort of fulfillment, you can't fulfill that really well out of pallet rack either, right? So at some point you have to decant those cartons of items so that they can be picked at the each level kind of effectively, and that storage can blow up if you're not smart about how you design it.
Mm-hmm. A lot of good fun problems to solve.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots of challenges, and there's a lot of tools out there right now that really enable us to be efficient, to design ergonomic workstations, to be smart about how we're building these rainbow pallets, and just being flexible. Flexibility is the key these days. And in the past, mechanisms were made for store fulfillment and shipping to different stores, whereas now it's everything's changed. Stuff that was done 20 years ago the needs today are completely different. So flexibility and knowing that going into it, how we're designing and approaching it is the key.
I think it's another important subject to talk about is, what will the ultimate impact be on brick and mortar stores and in the retail environment? Forever, at least for the last 20 years, everybody, or not everybody, but many people have been predicting the doom and gloom and the demise of the traditional brick and mortar retail store. And up to this point, we have not seen that. Traditional brick and mortar retail sales still are well above that of online sales. But do you think this further precipitates a change in buying trends?
It depends. I mean, that's another great question. So people are still social. We're not hermits. We like to get out and experience things. Going out into a store and looking at stuff, touching and feeling it, that's the experience. I mean, online shopping is getting really, really good with being able to try on virtual wardrobe and, being able to see things, how that will look on your, with a body scan and how that will fit you. And I'm just talking apparel right now, but a lot of this is experiential. You want to get out and see stuff. You want to put your hands on stuff before you buy it. And, sometimes you don't know what you want until you're walking through an aisle. It's like, oh, that, there's nuances with that. And you're never going to find that in an online catalog because, you'd spend, there's no time to go through every single object. So just browsing and window shopping, I think it's, I love it still. And I can't see going away from that. It's just the mechanisms, how maybe they won't carry as much stock in the store and it'll just be more of ship it, same day or next day and be more experiential, I believe.
Yeah, Linda, do you agree? Do you think that shopping malls as we know them now are going to be more experience centers?
Yeah, I mean, Apple stores are an excellent example of this, and they've really been ahead of the curve on this particular model, right? And I've heard other retailers who are interested in going kind of to that model where you've got sample inventory that the user or the shopper can interact with, talk to somebody about it, and then either they will order it to come to their house or the associate will go into the back room, right, and get it for them. So not everything is out on the shelf for people to pick up. So it depends on what kind of store it is. It's not applicable everywhere, right? But stores where you're going and you're looking at the items in person, or maybe you're able to do a try on, but they don't have the inventory with them for you to take home right away. But they can fulfill it so fast that it doesn't matter. And so that's going to reduce the amount of returns as well, which we haven't talked about reverse logistics very much and the impact of all of this. People are buying so much online during this period of time. As we know, e-commerce has a high returns rate. And so there's going to be a lot of solutions that have to be developed for stores that maybe they didn't have that much returns volume before, but they're going to see it spiking as a result of the e-commerce orders going up
Returns
as well.
are tricky.
Returns are tricky.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. They're challenging and
Well, they're not just tricky; they're very costly.
exactly. Yeah, it's so it just causes problems all the way through. So trying to comprehend that and design these new systems, comprehending all this e-commerce rush and all these trends that we're seeing right now, more returns are going to be flowing through, and just having efficient ways of processing them and getting them back. To be able to be resold and have customers happy with them. So,
What are some of the common solutions that you're seeing and you're proposing for online companies to handle these returns?
there's no one solution. So a lot of them sorting, getting stuff back, and a lot of times what we'll get back from stores is just a mixed bag of items. So we have to sort these items so that we can determine, are they resellable? Are they defective? We have to determine. So there's a lot of different flows that happen within returns processing. The first and foremost is sorting. Sort it. So there's different technologies to sort, and then just determining the right flows and the right mechanics, and the order cycle time to actually. Sometimes you have to repackage. So there's a lot of different steps that need to happen within the process. I can't say definitively we're always doing this, this process or the other, but there's just a lot of steps, and it takes analysis to figure out how to do it properly and how to properly size it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I'm hearing from clients and those in the supply chain industry right now is just the need for how quickly solutions can be stood up. And lead times, which you just go back before the COVID whole experience or a year or so ago, and a typical lead time for a material handling system would be 12 to 14 months, potentially by the time you do data analysis and get through commissioning and testing. And now we're being challenged to go even quicker, 3 to 4 month time frames.
Right.
Is that something that our industry is able to address?
It's a challenge. It's a challenge depending upon, look at our supply chains. Look our suppliers, some are overseas. Just adding the overseas trip of materials from overseas makes that a challenge. And so, we are looking at easier to implement solutions. It's just coming in with a broader tool set. Being an independent systems integrator, we have to come in and apply the right tool to the problem. And so there are different technologies that are easier to stand up. You know, AMRs are pretty easy to stand up, and some other forms of goods-to-person solutions are easier to stand up versus these whole, a complete greenfield approach with shuttle systems and a lot of automation. That's hard to stand up in 3 months. It's virtually impossible to stand up in 3 months, but you can get point solutions and scalable and add on pretty quickly with some other technologies that are not as heavy of a lift.
Yeah, and in my experience in the past, it's oftentimes been the software componentry that is the longer lead time or where a lot of the design specification discussions are. Linda, can you talk a little bit about what the industry is doing to address that, what Bastian is doing to address that?
Yeah, really in terms of speeding up that software life cycle, it's about understanding what the existing configurations and sort of off-the-shelf capabilities are and the smartest way to apply those to the business requirements. And so in the past, we would see where customers wanted to do a lot of very specific tasks that were unique to their business. And so that's really what spread out the timeline for developing the software, because one of the things that everybody knows about us is that we'll customize it, right? And so if you ask us for a software functionality, we won't say no. We did something that was so close to that. And you can and let's start with that, right? Let's pull something off the shelf that will get you up and running. And then add configuration or additional features once you're up and running, which is actually a really good approach anyway in software implementation, because you end up with a really clean software suite that doesn't have to be retested. It really can shorten that commissioning time as well. And then you've got associates who can get up and running with the system and get comfortable with it, and then you can fold in the sort of customized logic over time, which is less of a,
exactly.
less of a sea change.
Yeah, I liken it to, an analogy being, you're moving into a new home. There's the approach where you're going to go in and you're going to paint every single room the color that you want it. You're going to put in all the carpet that you want, put in the home automation and the sound system and all the TVs and everything wired the way that you want it, versus I'm going to move into the house. It may be all beige, may not have the light fixtures I want, but over time I'm going to start making those changes. Is that a fair analogy?
That's a perfect analogy. Yeah, and I just move in, and then I work on it after a while.
Right.
I couldn't have thought of a better example. Yeah.
Well, it kind of leads into as well as time being of the essence. I think that kind of leads into, on the consulting side, understanding customer requirements, understanding business rules, and really working to getting a deep understanding of customer needs and designing our systems around their current processes. What do they have that they need to keep? What functionality is a black box that we can, why reinvent the wheel? So just having really good understanding of customer needs through consulting leading into that implementation phase, there's less gotchas, there's less we didn't know about that, because in consulting we're uncovering all those rocks and doing that detailed analysis with clients interactively over the time. So
yeah, one thing that's been really impressive to me through this whole pandemic with certain companies is, this pandemic has had an unprecedented impact on businesses, and there's plenty of businesses out there that are struggling just to keep their doors open. But when you look, in my opinion, at some of the smartest and really truly the companies that are thinking far down the road, those are the ones that are talking about what their supply chain is going to be looking like, 10 years from now, after post the pandemic. And the customers that are spending time and money right now working on consulting engagements and really planning what their supply chain is looking like, I think those are the ones that are going to emerge from this whole pandemic and really be well positioned for success.
There's a lot of shifts happening right now that make companies either more successful or less successful. And I think what we're going to see is that the companies that we thought of as gold standard 10 years ago, if they're not nimble, then they might find themselves kind of left behind as other companies that are that are really creative and willing to explore different solutions quickly, right? They're beating their earnings estimates right now. I can think of a couple companies who have been on the ball over the past few months that have really done an excellent job at it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of in your opinion, Jason, what's the one takeaway that if you were going to give advice to a company right now as a consultant, what would you advise that company to be doing in the here and now of a global pandemic?
Take a step back, look at their operations, look at how their operations were set up initially, and look at how their current operations are being affected by this. And take a step back and really do some soul searching. Are their current systems set up for the long haul? And if not, let's engage in a consulting study. Let's do the analysis. Let's put a solution together to address future needs.
Yeah, very challenging thing to do, especially in times like this, Linda. It's almost like the game Tetris. Sometimes when you get to those advanced levels, those pieces are coming down faster than you can find spots for them. So what would be your advice in how a company can take a step back? Because I think Jason's point is an excellent one, that now is the time to really evaluate what's going on and try and tune out the noise.
Yeah, so some of my favorite life advice is be where you are. A lot of times we get frustrated because we want things to go back to the way they were, and it's not going to. And so this is an opportunity for us to improve operations and to be more successful going forward. So I would say that the main focus as we're taking that effort to look at how we can improve these systems going forward is to think about flexibility, game out the different possible scenarios. Are we okay if this happens to order profiles? Are we okay if this happens to our labor force? What can we do to mitigate those potential risks? And then see what we can do in the design to be flexible in those scenarios, rather than just saying, this is how it's going to be. We're designing a system that's very rigid around this one potential outcome. That's not going to work at this time anymore.
Yeah, the sensitivity testing, I think, is very, very important and really challenging a company's business plan and where they're going, and being nimble, as you point, I think is very, very important. That what works today is probably not going to work tomorrow, and just that constant challenging of the business plan is very, very important.
Well, and that gets into, like I mentioned, consulting, but doing that alternatives analysis, doing the sensitivity analysis, developing simulation models that test all those, and getting performance metrics, that are of all these different scenarios. When you're using simulation as a test bed to really determine, hey, is this the right way to go forward with our business? Is a great tool. It's a great practice.
I've heard, over the last few weeks, few months, that, certain companies saying, well, now is not the time to be spending, 20, 40, $50 million on an automated system. But now sure is a heck of a good time to spend maybe a more palatable amount of money on a consulting study and a simulation type study where you can, really be well positioned to take that next step when the time is right and improve your supply chain.
Completely agree. I think we're going to see a big spike in demand for automated systems in the next couple years. And the people who are spending the time now to understand their business and to look forward to what could be coming, they'll be the ones who are ready to execute when their capital does free up, versus the people that wait and then start thinking about it once they get the go-ahead to spend the money.
That's right.
They'll be waiting for capacity to open up, from integrators and manufacturers.
So Jason and Linda, thank you for joining me here today to talk about the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic is having on the supply chain. We look forward to future episodes in this series where we'll talk about a whole host of different subjects that are affecting the supply chain and where really the material handling systems automation industry is headed in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.